Welcome to episode 82 of the Steady On podcast, Unplanned Grace, with me, Angie Bauman, and my guest today, Natasha Smith. Natasha is the Creative Projects Manager at Save the Storks, an organization with a mission to reach the hearts of women and save the lives of babies. Natasha's work with Save the Storks supports the pro-life movement by telling stories through writing, video, photography, and most recently through co-authoring the book, Unplanned Grace. Like so many things in our culture, titles or labels have become polarized. And I confess that I hesitate to label myself these days because of the negative pushback that can come from being almost anything you declare yourself to be. But talking with Natasha helped me have a better understanding of what it can mean and what it can look like to be pro-life. One of the most profound moments in the conversation came for me when Natasha said that pro-life is for women, that pro-life is for the child, that pro-life is for the dad. Statistics tell us that many women have abortions not because they don't want the baby, but because they want their baby to have a quality of life they feel they cannot provide. And that fear is something that we individually as Jesus followers and we corporately as faith communities have a responsibility to discuss and figure out how to help alleviate. My verse for this episode comes from Psalm 139, verse 14, and it says this, and maybe these are familiar words to you: I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. No matter your story with the subject of abortion, and many of us have a story with abortion, I believe that you will feel it is heard and respected in this conversation. Natasha is calling all of us to become better educated on the real issues and more involved in real solutions so that we can lend a hand to the one who needs support. Let's listen in. Hello, Steady On community, and welcome to this Stronger Together conversation. I'm Angie Bauman, and with me today is my guest, Natasha Smith. Natasha, welcome to the Steady On community.
Thank you, Angie. It's so good to be here.
Natasha is an author and a creative projects manager at Save the Storks, which we're going to talk about in just a second what that is. But I think, am I right in believing you are a creative of all kinds of sorts because you do video and photography and writing? So are you just a creative? What else do you do with your creativity? Not just like minimized. I mean, just like wholly,
Yeah, that is a lot of it. I have my own photography business that I've had for 14 years doing portraits and landscapes. And I'm also in seminary. So I've been following a lot of my writing passion, developing that at Denver Seminary as well, and studying Old Testament there. So I love seeing all the overlaps with, seeking beauty and creativity and story, and that groundedness of, how the gospel just sheds light on all of it.
Yes. I have shared pieces of this before, so some of my regular listeners might know this story, but I'll tell you a couple. So I am not an outdoor girl, like at all. And when I was young, we used to camp some. I didn't like it at all. I had like asthma and allergies, and the outside just sort of wasn't my friend, And so when I began to get a little older and I could make my own decisions, I just kind of didn't do outside things. And a few years ago, you said Old Testament. That's where I'm going with this, because a few years ago, I did a deep dive into the book of Genesis. And it just rocked my world as I not only just the beauty of his creation, but the intentionality in his creation and how much I realized I was missing because he was revealing himself. He is revealing himself all the time. I'm sure with your creativity, this is something that is true in your heart too, but just all the time, how he's speaking to us and revealing himself in nature and creativity. And so I wouldn't label myself an outdoor girl yet, but I'm so much more an outdoor girl an appreciator than I ever was before, because it's gorgeous out there and I was missing it. So
yes, I highly encourage everyone to get out there. And what's fun with this book that we wrote, Brittany, my co-author, and I both love the outdoors. And so through the writing process, we would write and research all these pretty hard topics and then go out go camping out in Colorado and be able to think through and process and pray through.
Yes, exhale, sort of. Yeah, absolutely. So so this new book project, Natasha, as you just said, has co-written it with Brittany Smith, both Smiths, not related, but it is called Unplanned Grace: A Compassionate Conversation on Life and Choice. And I think that a lot of this, the passion or the leading for this book, has come out of your work with Save the Stork. So would you start us off by educating me and our listener? Tell us a little bit about what Save the Storks is and what kind of being a part of that community, that organization, has taught you.
Yeah, Save the Storks is a national pro-life nonprofit that really exists to help create culture change through compelling stories and narratives so people really understand what's going on and have that empathy and compassion for the issue. And also we enable and empower strategic partners, which largely is pregnancy care centers or just pregnancy centers, to serve and value every life. And Save the Storks was started with this really cool vision, and they started building what we call mobile medical units or stork buses. And these buses range in size, and pregnancy centers own and operate them. And this mobile unit is basically it's a mobile clinic. So they can provide free ultrasounds and pregnancy tests. And some pregnancy centers also provide STI, STD testing on board these units. And they can go out into their community and offer this free care to whomever needs it. So they go to college campuses, to rural communities near abortion clinics, and just provide people with alternative options. And those buses ended up being a bridge to people who may not know about the free resources that are in their own area, to the wealth. I mean, there really is an amazing wealth of care and support for women who are facing an unplanned pregnancy. So that's one major thing that Save the Storks does. And another way that we support the movement is by elevating pro-life leaders who are serving at pregnancy centers. And so Save the Storks has a partnership program where we create free conferences, training. We'll do marketing support. We'll help centers rebrand so they have a broader reach in their local community and can be more relevant to those women who might be searching online late at night, trying to figure out if they are pregnant and where they can go for that kind of support.
So when you say pro-life, because I love the name of your book, it's a compassionate conversation on life and choice. And I think the issue of abortion is so polarized. Is that a right word to use about it? So even kind of that word pro-life, like, it raises something up in me and it feels like judgment, like, it's something. And so would you just speak to that? Because in the reading that I've done in your book, and that's not where you're coming from, but can you talk to us about, like, maybe why that perception is so easily grabbed onto and why that's not the message that you want to communicate?
Absolutely. Yes. And you're right. It has been so polarized, and it's also been politicized, which adds to that polarization. And so it's been really difficult to engage this conversation because either side instantly thinks that they know what the other side means. And so with this book, we were trying to create a middle ground that both sides can agree on, because I've heard people say, that pro-lifers only care about the birth of the child, or they don't care about the woman, or they don't care about the circumstances either of that woman or the circumstances that child is born into. And if that were true, that would be very valid. And we should do something about that. Well, that is happening. And people are actually meeting the very tangible, practical needs that women are facing. And they do care about the circumstances, both of that mom and what that child is born into. And so this book is that middle ground, I think, of showing how pro-life people who are simply pro-life is for life. We want life to be thriving. It's not judging or shaming. It's simply encouraging life. And as part of that, we have to encourage all life. So we care about the dads, we care about the moms, we care about everyone in this story, because all of the life matters, not just the unborn. And vulnerability is there for every partner, in this story. and we have to care. And so through these stories in our book, you'll see how pro-life is for women and for their circumstances and for their betterment and for that child and for the dad. We really want to ensure that every life is cared for, protected, and supported no matter what.
The thing that caught my attention immediately was this quote that I want to read. Women would rather go to God with an abortion than face their church with an unplanned pregnancy. It's time for us to do better when it comes to loving and caring for these women. Okay, there's so much in there that I kind of want to unpack with you just a little bit, but from a pastor's heart, this broke my pastor's heart, I guess I would say. And so I want to just ask, what is the message, or what are the messages that, and we're generalizing here, I know, but what are the messages that our faith communities are sending or are not sending that makes you believe that this quote is true, that really women would rather go to God after the fact than try to go to their church families or a church, if it's not their church family, to try to get some kind of help when they're facing an unplanned pregnancy?
Yeah, that's a tough reality and a tough conversation to have. And some of why we made that statement was based on a CareNet study. CareNet's a national nonprofit that also supports pregnancy centers. And they found that women in the church who had an abortion, 65% of them said that they believed that church members would judge an expectant single mom. And then in addition to that, 50% of women felt like sermons about God's forgiveness didn't apply to them as well. So there's a lot missing, I think, either this perception that maybe, just they are perceiving and it's not the reality, but they feel that is true, which is, of course, something to be addressed. And then those who just not feeling like God can forgive them, but then also feeling like others might be judged. And so, of course, we're not saying that every church is like that, but that those who are within a church may feel that this is true, whether or not it is true. So we should do something to help alleviate that misperception. And one way I think we can do that is, recognize within this scenario of unplanned pregnancies, there is the feeling of judgment and shame and the fear of gossip and being labeled. And there's one woman I interviewed for this book, and she said, I didn't want to become a stereotype. And that was a real concern for her because she kept on getting stuck into the cycle and now having another pregnancy. And that kind of fear was very real to her. And so I think the church can do a lot and just simply learning from Jesus. I mean, that's our whole life's journey anyways. But in Luke 15, there's a series of stories where the religious elite come to Jesus and, they think of themselves better as the other sinners around them. And Jesus responds with such compassion. And the sequence of stories in that chapter are the widow with a lost coin and the shepherd who leaves his 99 and goes after that one lost sheep, and the prodigal son whose father stands there waiting and then sprinting and hugging his lost son and welcomes him in. And so the heart of Christ, which should also be the heart of his church, is this compassion and seeking out those people who are lost and feel the shame of their past and, don't expect to be welcomed into the family, but who are with open arms. And we get to be part of throwing the party, which is what one of the people that we interviewed in the book, Amy Ford, she's the CEO of Embrace Grace, which does this amazing work partnering with churches to support moms. And that's what she said in this. She shared the story too of the prodigal son and saying, that we get to be part of throwing the party of when people, find God's love and get to bask in that. And so again, like the church, what we need to be doing, showcasing to the world around us and showcasing to the lost is not, we're a religious elite who are better than anyone else. I mean, Jesus' criticism was not towards the broken, but those who thought that they weren't broken. But his interactions with those who were broken, I mean, he met them where they were. and he met their real needs, and he offered healing to those deeper wounds, and he embraced them, and he never thought of himself as too good to be bothered by their problems. And that's exactly what pregnancy centers are doing in our country. And especially through the mobile medical units, that they can go and reach people where they are and meet their real needs and provide that invitation towards healing. And the church needs to walk alongside those pregnancy centers and offer that discipleship and more holistic care, because that soul care is really important.
Yeah. Yes to all of that. And I love practical. I love real talk about solutions. And so what does it look like, do you think, for the church to meet people where they are in this situation, or to walk alongside them? As you've talked to women who have experienced maybe additional pain from faith communities or a lack of acceptance from faith communities, what could we be doing better?
Oh, that is such a good question. Actually, at the end of every chapter throughout the book, we have next steps. And so we offer many different ideas of just some place to start, dependent on where your church really feels that heart tug. And so there's a whole array of opportunity of, if your church really has a huge passion and ministry towards homeless ministry, you can help support maternity homes. Or if you really care about the counseling of people who have been brokenhearted and wounded and gone through trauma, if there's people who are licensed professionals within your church, you can offer that. And the whole last chapter of the book is specific towards the church, of offering, I think after abortion healing programs is a huge needed ministry that is going to be hard. Because especially for men in this conversation, we only touched on it briefly within the book, but that's another topic that I kind of saw in the writing process of, there's so many people who have deep pain from choices that they didn't feel like they had the right to say anything about, and yet they're reaping some of the regret still. And so the church can meet those needs and just apply God's grace and forgiveness and remind people of God's grace. And so that's a huge theme, is, paying attention to how Jesus interacted with others and start modeling that. And that looks so different, depending on your community and the needs within it. But that's the first place to start, in my opinion.
I think being able to look at it and not look away. I mean, that's what I hear you saying, not just feel like, well, this is too messy, or this is too hard, this is too controversial. There's something in the faith communities, I believe, that when it has to do with something around sex, we get like all too, I don't know, this is just too much. We don't talk about this. We don't deal with it. And so we end up just shutting people out and really, I think, feeling like this is a place we can't talk about these hard things that, if you have, and I agree with what you say about the men too. Like, I think no matter what kind of pregnancy loss or what kind of trauma or this, it affects the men too. And we largely don't really even look at that most of the time. And and we do send a message of, this is just too much for us. It's too messy for us. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think just being able to offer people a place where they can be known and loved is so, so important. Because I mean, just think, if the people within your local congregation feel safe to release the pain and regret and the shame that they're holding, I mean, they're going to revolutionize this country, because they're going to be standing out and saying, like, this was my story. This is what I've experienced. And that story can change other people's lives, and that can help other people make different decisions, or other people find healing. And that ripple effect is just going to be marvelous when you see it. But it takes time. And of course, that healing process is slow, but it's available.
It is slow, but I'm a firm believer that shame cannot grow when it's brought to the light. I picked that up. I think Brene Brown said that. That's who I know who's said it. And I say that kind of thing all the time, because that sentiment is real. And so when we ask people to keep what they feel shame about hidden, because we don't want to touch it, we don't want it to get on us, right? Then we actually are, I think, delaying any kind of healing process, and especially, and this is the work of the enemy, any kind of redemptive, we're all invited to be an illustration of God's redemptive story. But if we're not allowed to share the place that needs redeeming or that needed redeeming, then how do we ever get to be able to say, this is what I went through, but God? We never get to that part, right? When we can't actually have a place where we can share our stories.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And I think that another message that sometimes can be portrayed by not talking about these kind of issues is that they are worse than others. And so certain sins are okay. And, it's gossip and slander is less bad than, a sexual sin, as opposed to recognizing like we all desperately need God's grace applied to our lives. And we all have experienced some kind of unplanned crazy that broke us. And God is there to meet us in that place and redeem all things.
Yeah. I don't love, but I really appreciate a term that you use, which is abortion vulnerable women. And I want to sit there for just a second because I had never really thought of it that way before I read the information about your book. And so will you tell me first, what is an abortion vulnerable woman?
Yes. Abortion vulnerable women, that term references those who feel pressured towards abortion, potentially because of their circumstances or their lack of support. And so many women that I've met or the stories I've read, they say that they're scared and they feel alone. And that is a very strong pressure towards saying, like, I just can't even do this. And that's why they feel, if their circumstances were different, they would probably choose life. But because of their pressures and circumstances, they feel like they cannot. And so we kind of break the book up into 3 sections where we talk about the economic pressures, the relational pressures, and then the health related concerns that all help, add to that weight for an abortion vulnerable woman, where when those things are met, they choose differently. And one stat that I think is pretty heartbreaking is 73% of women who had abortions say that they felt pressured into
73%.
Yes, 73%. And that same number, though it's a different stat, 73% of women who choose abortion did so because of economic reasons.
It was cheaper to get the abortion than have the child.
They didn't feel like they could afford.
They couldn't afford to do it.
Yeah. So again, both of those things is like, man, if 73% of women are feeling pressured towards this because of whatever the circumstances are in their life, and a large majority are doing it simply for economic reasons, we can jump in and help in that way. We can actually give them options, give them an understanding of what's available to them so that they don't feel pressured. And we can also help support the very practical needs of like housing or, helping them find a job so that that isn't the issue. And that is so much of what pregnancy centers do across the country, of really helping alleviate those pressures, helping women think through why they're feeling like abortion is their only option. Because if we're pro-choice, then there needs to be choices. So just one choice isn't really a choice, So I think that term is kind of interesting as well, because pro-choice is really only implying one option. And so many women that we interviewed said that they felt like they had no choice because there was all these other circumstances driving their decision.
And then you've got grief on top of grief, because I'm thinking if 73% of women say they really felt like that was the only decision they had that was available to them. So you've got the trauma of the whole situation of getting an abortion, which I think for any woman would be a traumatic situation. You've got perhaps the abuse, the bullying, the pressure. I don't know what word you want to use for that, but you've got that you're dealing with. You've got this immense grief over a life that you did not allow to come into the world, or was not allowed to come into the world, however you want to say that. You've got the guilt perhaps of ending the life. And so what this woman is dealing with, I guess I just say all that because it's kind of popping into my brain all at once, but it's very complicated and tangled and heavy. There's just so much heaviness over that. Plus, if you have the pressure of feeling like you can't ever tell anybody because nobody would understand, man.
Yeah, exactly. It creates, it's being a victim of your circumstances. And that's a real tragedy. And for those who have felt that way, we also have a chapter about after abortion care, because pregnancy centers also offer counseling and healing. And that's also where the church can step in, because we don't believe that that God's forgiveness doesn't apply to that. There is redemption for all things. And so we want to be sensitive to those who've had that, because I think it's 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, I can't remember exactly, but women in the church have had an abortion. And so we have to be sensitive to that, because so many people have been touched by this, and many might have simply felt like I had no other choice.
Right.
And that's why we have to just season all of our words with such grace and compassion, because these stories are hard. Like not a single one of them was like a flippant decision or an easy choice. It was difficult.
Yes. Season our words. I'm writing with that down. Season our words with grace. I'm going to hang on to that. I love that sentiment. Yeah. I always, whenever I'm speaking or preaching, I always try to, because of my background probably, but I always try to speak to the one who, whatever I'm saying, it's very personal and I don't know it, because as you said, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 of the women in our churches have experienced abortion. And so I know it's a lot more, the hurt, the pain is a lot more widespread than most of us are aware. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What are a couple, you mentioned that in your book that there are some myths that abortion advocates really don't want us to know. Would you address maybe a couple of those things for those of us who may be less educated, just kind of about I'm going to call it an industry or a business of abortion clinics and abortions?
I think one thing is that women are told that this is the best option for them. And for them to achieve their dreams, to be successful, to finish school, to, do what they really want to do in life, they have to have an abortion. And that is their best option. And then my concern for them is, well, what happens if they do regret that? What happens for those who, are saddened by that loss when the abortion industry says, well, that abortion wasn't anything, it was just a couple says, but yet there's a weight and there's a pain that exists still. And I've met with people who were faced with that decision, who felt like, to finish college, they had to, or to be successful in their career. In fact, I was talking with a friend of mine, Ashley Bratcher, who is the star in Unplanned, the movie, and she experienced that scenario and was told to have an abortion in order to get her career as an actress, and she refused. And her son's delightful, and they've been able to act together, and it's just amazing to see what can happen, because none of us know our futures. None of us know what could be with a life. And to just tell a woman, just have an abortion and move on, you can't just move on, because that was something that's a part of you. And they don't provide something for them after the fact. But through pregnancy centers, whether or not a woman chooses abortion, they have care for them no matter what. So I think that's a huge one. Your life and success is dependent on an abortion. But the pregnancy center support, none of them make any money off of a woman's decision. And that's a huge thing to be aware of.
Yes. I appreciate you mentioning that, because that is a huge thing to be aware of. And I think no matter our struggle, but most certainly in this, when you feel, I think probably a lot of women also feel the time pressure, right? I have to make this decision right now. And when you feel alone, or when you feel like you're not supported, or there are people in your life that you can't tell, and you're trying to make the decision maybe pretty much on your own, or there's a very loud voice or voices in your life saying, this is the best way to do this. This is the right move for you. I think to know And will you give me some information so I can put it in the show notes of some hotline pregnancy centers or something, so that if anyone listening is facing that, will you help me? We're going to put some stuff in the show notes so that if you're listening, we can guide you to the right place. But I think just the idea of there's a place to call, I can get some help, I can ask some questions. It kind of breaks that alone trap.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Local pregnancy centers offer that care. So you can Google a pregnancy center near me. Additionally, Heartbeat International has a 24/7 hotline that anyone can call, and they will also help find your local pregnancy center. And we can get you that number and put that in the notes.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Awesome. Yeah. This has been fantastic. So educational. Thank you so much for your time. One of the things I always do, I love to share resources. So I'm just going to, will you allow us to just look into the life of Natasha Smith for just a second and tell us, is there anything at all right now that you are in the midst of a book launch? I know, but are you reading, studying, listening to, watching, anything goes that is bringing you joy and keeping you connected to God right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a few different books kind of that I pick up and put down at various times.
Because authors are readers, right? Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So one book that I've been slowly working through is called Futureville by Skye, Jethani. And it kind of talks about how our views of the future shape our present. So if we, think that the whole world's going to burn and we don't really need to care about anything, we're not going to care. And if we think that, we're on an evolutionary stream towards, the perfect world, that also shapes our actions today. And so it's kind of talking about, with us as believers ushering in the kingdom of God right now, what are we doing today that's going to affect the future? So that's been a good read. I also am an outdoorsy person. So I just started a book called 7 Summits, which talks about two men, Dick Bass and Frank Wells, who after the age of 50 decide to hike all of the top peaks in all 7 continents. So that's more of an adventure story of determination and resilience, which has been interesting so far.
I bet. Yeah.
And then I've also been studying the book of Romans and in scripture. It's always a good one to be reminded of, how much we need the Holy Spirit, how much we need to be shaped by God. And that influences, everything that we've talked about. To have God's compassionate view of others, we have to have his Spirit in us, working in us, and showing even ourselves our identity in the eyes of Christ, so that we can see others as God sees them as well. And then one podcast I absolutely love listening to as well is called Unconditional Love. It's by what's his name? Malcolm Smith. He is an incredible Bible teacher, and so much of my theology and he teaches on Luke 15 all the time, and the prodigal son, and that compassion and heart of God really has shaped me a lot. And so he is just an incredible person to listen to and just grow in wonder of how incredible the Father's heart is towards us.
Yes. Yeah. I love all of that. I love that story in the prodigal son, but I love it, but I'm always sad to see how much I can be so quickly like the older brother. And yes. And it just, so sometimes I go back in there and I'm like, oh, this is so disheartening. I don't want to be this way. And yet I am this way. And I'm equally like the younger brother for squandering the inheritance. I always, our inheritance is a kingdom inheritance of rest and joy and love. And I always ask myself, when I don't feel those things, when I don't have those things, it's not because it's not what's being offered to me, right? It's because I'm squandering it and choosing other things. And so I love that story, and it just gets me every time. It's so convicting. Yes. Oh, hey, since you're an outdoorsy person, I just want to ask, do you happen to know the work of Laurie Kehler? She's a Steady On friend. I'm going to get you connected with her because she writes books my favorite is This Outdoor Life. And she writes about the beauty of God. She came into her work came into my life the same time I was studying Genesis. It was just everywhere, all over the place for me right then. And I think that you would probably really appreciate what she writes. So
I would love to read it.
Yeah. So I'll get you that. So Natasha, again, thank you so much for educating us, for talking to us. Thank you for your obedience in the work that you're doing and for writing this book, and all the best as the Lord helps you get this message out into the world.
Thank you so much, Angie. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Until next time, friends. Peace. The concept of women being abortion vulnerable has changed my heart significantly, and I am grateful for the opportunity to learn from Natasha because it has helped me become more aware and more grace-filled for people who are touched by abortion. Psalm 139:14, again, this time in the Message paraphrase, says, "Thank you, high God. You are breathtaking. Body and soul, I am marvelously made." And thank you, Natasha, for helping us remember every life is marvelously created by the hand of God. I have a copy of Natasha's book to give away. New subscribers to my newsletter with U.S. addresses between December 15 and December 23 will be eligible to win. So visit the website, livesteadyon.com, and click the orange newsletter button on the homepage to sign up. I would love to send you a copy of Natasha's book, Unplanned Grace. Next week, my dear ministry friend, Tiffany Jo Baker, will return to the podcast to give us some tips on recovering from the holidays. If you are in full speed right now with no end in sight, hold on, my friend. It will not take you down. And Tiffany and I will offer some encouragement about exhaling right before the big day gets here. If you'd like to support the ministry of Steady On, there are 3 things you can do, and they're all free. First, you can subscribe to the podcast. That helps a ton. Second, you can rate and review this podcast because that helps other people find us. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter by visiting the website livesteadyon.com and clicking the orange newsletter button at the top. And the link for that is also in today's show notes. I always welcome comments and feedback, so please feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can email me at steadyonpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.